in the highway, and there would be 10, possibly 12 young men lying out in the highway on their back with their hands behind their head for a pillow, listening to the concert. She played ragtime piano, and they loved it. That was a wonderful time of life in Birchville Springs, even though it was wartime. I remember, Clopper, the day the war was declared over, 1945, and everybody wanted to celebrate in some manner. We, having an automobile, went down in front of the Howell cottage and lined up with all the other people that had an automobile, and they just held their horns down and drove all the way to Altamont and circled Mr. Williams' store and came back to Birchville Springs with their horns blaring. The war was over, and my dad was back home by now, and he and his brother bought school buses. The county contracted at that time, and they bought 2 buses, and they only had them a year, and the county voted to buy county buses. They were left, and it's difficult holding those 2 buses with debt on them. Hard to sell a school bus. There's not a lot of different uses for one. But they sold one of them to a man to haul coal miners on, and they took the other one. The brother of my dad had a store, and they took the international bus, took the seats out and mounted shelves on the wall and made a rolling store out of it. Put a little extension on the frame and floored it on the back, and put a kerosene tank back there and hauled livestock feed, and it was quite a thing to have a rolling store coming to your door out in these rural areas. Oh, it would get so dusty on those old roads, you know, and everything in there would be covered with dust. And every day my dad would take an air hose and go through and open the back door and the front door and blow that dust off of everything. Well, the rolling store era lasted on up till about 1950, and that was when my dad got a job as a salesman in 1950, and our life changed forever. Our poverty finally ended. During those years, there were some things that I remember happening. For medical attention, we would go to a man on the backbone whose name was James Bean. He was a minister, and people called him Dr. Bean. I know he didn't have a license, but he was the closest thing we had.
He had been to medical school.
He had some medicine too, some sulfur drugs, and I remember him looking down my throat and things like that, you know. And like I say, he was the nearest thing we had to a doctor. There was a bad thing happened in our community about that time, and I debated whether to tell this, and because it sort of points to something bad, but it's real. The sheriff's department in Grundy County at that time had deputies that were located in each community. They didn't get paid on a salary, and a lot of them didn't have automobiles. And we had a deputy sheriff in our community with the name of Henry Myers. we had what we call the Christmas tree, the community Christmas tree every year, either in the library or over at the old hotel. And this particular year, must have been 47, somewhere along there, we were having the Christmas tree at the hotel. And we were all inside, and they were singing and doing different things, and in the end they would be passing out little bags of fruits and nuts, and it was a happy time. Outside they were shooting firecrackers, and all of a sudden someone ran in and announced that someone had been shot. Turned out that this Henry Myers, the deputy sheriff, had shot two young men, Doc and John Richardson. He had ordered them to quit shooting firecrackers on the porch of the hotel. I guess they made greater noise with that hollow porch underneath there, and when they disobeyed, a scuffle ensued and they were shot. Turned out these two brothers lived in the Utah community. By the way, my dad hauled one of them to the McMinnville Clinic that night, and neither died, thank goodness. But that's how I know the story so well, even though I was young, through my dad. And this Henry Myers had a little grocery store down right beside of where the electricity came back on to Highway 56. And his location there gave him a good advantage. The old dirt road there that led to the Utah community was quite a savings in distance from walking around by the way the highway ran, and then it was still quite a distance from there on down to Brown's store. So the people from Utah patronized Myers Grocery. He had a thriving business there for a time. He was right next to the Stanley Brown Garage that I wanted to talk about also. And after this shooting, the people of the Utah community, who were all interrelated to each other, either to these brothers or to their wives or some way, they boycotted that store. They would walk out that road and walk to the other side of the highway, and then walk down the highway to Brown's store or to my Uncle JB's store to do their grocery shopping. And it caused Mr. Myers to slack off in his business to the point that he had to close the doors. The boycott was successful, and he, after he closed, moved to Cleveland, Ohio. The time was getting on up to about 1950 or somewhere along there by the time he closed, and the industrial north was booming, and so Henry went to Ohio and stayed there the rest of his working years. Back to this Stanley Brown Garage business that was located right near Myers' store. Stanley was a veteran of World War II, and he was Dennis Brown's brother. He was a skilled mechanic, could work on diesel engines, and at that time that was a pretty unusual thing. He, being a veteran, got a building, a used building, delivered to Burnsville Springs and rebuilt it, built out of concrete blocks, and a wall of that building is still standing today in 2010. And at about 1946, I suppose, a man had come into this area and made arrangements to get all of the timber in these gulfs, including the Stone Door Gulf, everything except in the Savage Gulf. His name was H.G. Allen. He was from West Memphis, Arkansas. And I'll tell you, this Mr. Brown, this Stanley Brown, worked on all of his equipment. World War II surplus Jeeps, those old ambulances he used to transport the men with to and from the job sites. He had 3 or 4 sawmills going, and he had another thing called half tracks. It had 2 rubber tires on the front and a track on the rear, and that preceded what we now know as the timberjack. Those big deuce-and-a-half trucks, they called them, 10-wheel trucks that hauled the logs and didn't have no cab on them, you know, just to open, just a windshield. Well, they had so many of those that the lot up in behind Brown's garage, he would have them parked up in there, the ones that he'd either was going to work on or had already finished. And if you passed through, you'd have thought it was a National Guard armory there, you know, with a block building and then all that army equipment. And people were literally coming here from even other states to get a job because there was plenty of work here in Bursaby Springs. And businesses such as Brown's down there and Hobbs were all doing good. Well, I wanted to tell about some of the time in the elementary school down there near where the present day community center is. There was an old wood building. It was the same school building my dad had attended. And most of the years that I was there, Miss Elsie Tate was the teacher. What a wonderful lady she was, and what a wonderful teacher. She taught all 8 grades in one room. Now, a time or two during my elementary years, we got up enough students. We would go out and we would be urged to go out and try to recruit students from the